Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The number of COVID-19 infections in India has surpassed 5 million, the second highest in the world after the United States. Nearly 1,300 people have died in the country and more than 90,000 have contracted the virus in the last 24 hours. In Pakistan, 4 people lost their lives to the virus overnight, with the death toll at 6,393. Globally, the COVID-19 has claimed over 933,000 lives, while infecting close to 29.5 million. The Taliban say an agreement has been reached with the Kabul on most of the topics related to the mechanism of starting the sessions. After the second meeting with the Kabul representatives in Doha, Taliban spokesperson Mohammad Naeem said 2 sides have agreed to establish a liaison committee to sort out the differences. Naeem said, however, there are some issues that have not been agreed upon yet. Israel says its warplanes and combat helicopters have bombed the Hamas post in Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Forces said the air raids were carried out in retaliation for rockets fired from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory. No casualties have been reported yet. The air raids come as Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates formally signed U.S. broker deals to normalize ties with Israel. Japan's parliament has elected Yoshihide Suga as the country's new prime minister following the resignation of Shinzo Abe. State media says Suga won a poll for prime minister, bagging 314 votes in the 465-member lower house. United Nations humanitarian chief Mark Lowcock has warned spectre of famine has returned to war-torn Yemen. Addressing the Security Council, Lowcock said the UN appeal has received only 30%, leaving 9 million Yemenis to cope with deepening cuts to aid. The chief said if countries continue to hold back money from the humanitarian response, it will be a death sentence for many families. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The number of COVID-19 infections in India has surpassed 5 million, the second highest in the world after the United States. Nearly 1,300 people have died in the country and more than 90,000 have contracted the virus in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed over 933,000 lives, while infecting close to 29.5 million. Details in this report.
COVID-19 pandemic is devastating healthcare systems as governments scramble to contain the virus. Germany says the coronavirus spike in a Bavarian holiday resort may be lower than feared as they investigate a rise in infections. Local authorities have tracked down more than 30 people they suspect may have been infected from the same source. Meanwhile, Britain's government says it is working hard to fix operational challenges in the testing system caused by a surge in demand.
As we expand capacity further, we're working round the clock to make sure everyone who needs a test can get a test. The vast majority of people who use our testing service get a test that is close to home, and the average distance travelled to a test site is now just 5.8 miles, down from 6.4 miles last week. But the whole House knows that there are operational challenges, and we're working hard to fix them.
The UN says it can hold an in-person meeting of the General Assembly in New York as early as November to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic. World Health Organization says countries should not put children out of school anymore as it is more detrimental for them. It said the decision to close schools should be a last resort, temporary, and only at a local level in areas with intense COVID-19 transmission.
To support countries in every situation, UNESCO, UNICEF and WHO yesterday published updated guidance on school-related public health measures in the context of COVID-19. The guidance provides practical advice for schools in areas with no cases, sporadic cases, clusters of cases, or community transmission.
Australia's Victoria state is on course to relax a strict lockdown by the end of the month after average number of cases over the last 2 weeks dropped below 50. South Korea's new virus cases also stayed below 200 for the 14th consecutive day. China reported 12 new confirmed infections of COVID-19 across the mainland, all of which were imported.
Well, now the Taliban say an agreement has been reached with Kabul on most of the topics related to the mechanism of starting these sessions. After the second meeting with the Kabul representatives in Doha, Taliban spokesperson Mohammad Naeem said two sides have agreed to establish a liaison committee to sort out the differences. Naeem said, however, there are some issues that have not been agreed upon yet. He said leaders of both delegations confirmed that discussions on issues will be held after the mechanism and timetable for the dialogue is agreed. They said the negotiations should be for the solution of Afghanistan's problems and not for the happiness of others. The Taliban said they seek to work with Kabul for the establishment of the truly Islamic Afghan inclusive central system in an independent Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Israel says its warplanes and combat helicopters have bombed the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Forces said the air raids were carried out in retaliation for rockets fired from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory. Israeli military said its fighter planes and choppers hit a number of Hamas targets. The military claimed it destroyed a Hamas weapons and explosive production plant and a military compound in the strikes. No casualties have been reported yet. Now, Palestinians have staged protests against the UAE and Bahrain's normalization deal with Israel. Earlier, Israel's Prime Minister and foreign ministers of the UAE and Bahrain participated in the deal signing ceremony hosted by the White House. More details in this report.
Outraged Palestinians rallied outside the UN office in Gaza and occupied West Bank to flee the UAE and Bahrain's normalization of ties with Israel. Chanting slogans and burning banners, the demonstrators said they refused to concede the rights of the Palestinian people. President Mahmoud Abbas said only Israel's withdrawal from occupied territories can bring peace to the Middle East. The disappointed Palestinians saw the move by the two Arab countries as an endorsement of Israel's occupation and operation of Palestinian territories.
For us as a Palestinian, we consider it very deep stabbing in the back of the Palestinians. It is a free offer for the Israelis to continue their occupation for our land and to expansion their settlements and carry on in the process of annexation of many Palestinian lands.
Hamas said the people of the region continue to view Israel as an enemy and accused the two Arab countries of siding with the enemy.
It's a day of rage for the Palestinian people and the Islamic and Arab world, a day of humiliation and insult for the leaders of Bahrain and Emirates who are normalizing with the Zionist occupation.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump hailed the dawn of a new Middle East after the three states signed agreements. Trump said he expects Saudi Arabia to be among 7 to 9 other Gulf countries to normalize relations with Israel.
I spoke with the King of Saudi Arabia. At the right time, I do think they will come in. Yes, I do. This is a very big and very historic moment, and I think everyone agrees to that. But we'll have other countries coming in fairly rapidly.
This is the first time Arab nations have established relations with Israel since Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994.
Now moving on, Japan's parliament has elected Yoshihide Suga as the country's new prime minister following the resignation of Shinzo Abe. State media says Suga won a poll for prime minister, bagging 314 votes in the 465-member lower house. Japan's Liberal Democratic Party elected Yoshihide Suga as its new leader after Shinzo Abe stepped down over health concerns. The former chief cabinet secretary of Abe, Suga, is the son of a farmer and does not belong to any political dynasty. After announcing the members of his cabinet, Suga will be formally inaugurated in a ceremony at the Imperial Palace. The new prime minister will hold a press conference later today. Now, UN humanitarian chief Mark Lowcock has warned spectre of famine has returned to war-torn Yemen. He singled out Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Kuwait for giving nothing to this year's $3.4 billion appeal for desperately needed aid. Addressing the Security Council, Lowcock said famine in Yemen was averted 2 years ago because donors met 90% of the UN's funding requirements. He said today the UN appeal has received only 30%, leaving 9 million Yemenis to cope with the deepening cuts to aid. The chief said if countries continue to hold back money from the humanitarian response, it will be a death sentence for many families. He once again called on all donors to pay their pledges now and increase their support. Meanwhile, West African mediators have failed to persuade leaders of the military coup in Mali to immediately hand over power to a civilian government. This comes after the 15-member Economic Community of West African states met Mali's military government. Ghana President and acting chair of ECOWAS, Nana Akufo-Addo, said they have not reached any agreement with the military junta. He said a mediating mission will return to Mali next week to try to resolve outstanding issues. Akufo-Addo said Mali needs a civilian leadership and the sanctions will only be lifted afterwards. ECOWAS imposed economic sanctions on military government after the coup on August 18th. Moving on now, the World Trade Organization says the US has violated the international rules when it imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. The remarks undermine President Trump's trade war against Beijing by imposing tariffs on over $400 billion of China's exports. In its reports, the three-member WTO panel said the US did not demonstrate that its measures were provisionally justified. The panel said the US duties broke trading rules because they applied only to China. Responding, China said it hoped US will respect the WTO rulings and take practical actions to maintain the multilateral trading system. The ruling bolsters Beijing's claims that Trump's trade war skirted the WTO rules. In the United States, Louisville City Mayor has agreed to pay $12 million to the family of Breonna Taylor, a black woman who was killed in her home by police. Taylor's lawyer, Lonita Baker, called the settlement just one in the effort to seek justice and praised new police reforms. Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, called for criminal charges against the officers. She also asked people to continue to say her daughter's name publicly in advocacy for police reforms. Taylor was shot at least 5 times on March 13th during a mistaken drug raid. The settlement includes police reforms in the city, requiring all search warrants to be approved by a senior officer. In a statement, social justice organization Until Freedom said no amount of money will bring back Breonna Taylor. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the wildfire in Spain's northern region of Galicia has remained active after 12 different blazes in Orense city covered the province in a huge cloud of smoke. The Galicia Region Fire Information Service said 6 of the flames have been controlled while other 6 are still active. The Spanish military said 121 firefighters and 42 fire engines have been deployed to battle the wildfires. State media reported at least 6,700 hectares have been burned. Global warming resulting from abrupt climate change due to emissions continues to worry scientists. In yet another unnerving revelation, they say the vast and ancient ice sheet sitting atop Greenland shed 113 square kilometers chunk of ice within last month. Details in this report.
The section of the Spalt Glacier at the northwest corner of the Arctic island had been cracking for several years. On the 27th of August, it finally broke free, clearing the way for inland ice loss to the sea. The Greenpeace ship has come to the very edge of the Arctic to document and protect that is hidden under the surface. Researchers say they want to make sure world leaders understand the urgency and the role of healthy oceans in tackling the climate crisis.
The new research is yet another important piece of evidence showing that it's really time we stop hitting the snooze button and wake up to the climate emergency. We need to curb climate emissions right now, immediately, and we need to create a network of ocean sanctuaries covering at least a third of the blue planet if we are to take climate crisis seriously.
The Arctic has warmed more than twice as fast as the rest of the world over the last 4 decades. Scientists say all 3 variables, sea ice, temperatures, and rainfall, are now being measured well beyond the range of past observations. That makes the future of the Arctic more of a mystery. From the deck of the ship, pilot Paul Ruziski muses over how quickly the region is changing since he began navigating between icebergs in 1996.
Well, not so long ago, I heard that we had 100 years before all the glaciers would be melting and the Arctic would be ice-free in the summer. Then I heard 75 years, 50 years, and recently I heard 15 years, 1-5. So it's accelerating. I'm not a scientist, but I listen to what the scientists say.
Sea ice coverage are now about 31%. Lower than in the decade after 1979, when satellite observations began. This vanishing of sea ice also contributes to the region's warming. The icy white expanse is replaced by patches of dark water that absorbs solar radiation rather than reflecting it back out of the atmosphere.
Now, Britain's Prince William and his wife Kate have visited an iconic bagel shop in London, where swiftly put to work. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge kneaded tray after tray of dough, which is then boiled and baked to make the bagels. William said he had never before tried one of the shop's bagels. The royal's Twitter page said their visit was meant to thank those who have gone above and beyond to help others during the pandemic. Now, Apple has unveiled a new personalized workout subscription service alongside new smartwatches and tablet computers. The new Fitness Plus collects health data gathered by an Apple Watch and then displays it alongside workout videos shown on a larger display. Apple said the platform will compete with existing fitness apps on iOS from Peloton, Les Mills and Feet. It also poses a challenge to Fitbit. Those wearables benefit from their own health coaching subscription service. Apple also introduced a new Apple Watch Series 6 that monitors blood oxygen for $399 and a lower-cost Apple Watch SE for $279. Apple's biggest seller, the iPhone, is expected to be announcing next month after its launch was delayed by several weeks because of the pandemic. Mexico City's ancient lake Texcoco has re-emerged, taken over the base of a control tower at an abandoned construction site of an airport. Officials have decided to let the swamp grow into a park. More details in this report.
Bright green stalks of weeds are sprouting from the ground where planes were supposed to take off at a new Mexico City airport. Officials are letting nature take over in their bid to transform the marshy swath of an ancient lake into a giant park. Mexico's former president commissioned a British architect to build a futuristic international airport at a cost of some $13 billion. Upon taking office in 2018, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador axed the project after arguing it will be costly to prevent sinking on the waterlogged soil.
El terreno donde se estaba construyendo.
Look at where they were building the Texcoco airport.
It was fortunate we called it off. How much was it going to cost us to continue pumping water out of the area? They chose the worst place.
The abandoned construction zone is now part of a project to conserve 12,200 hectares of marsh. Birds glided in a pond beneath columns of crisscrossing steel bars that were meant to become a terminal, greeting some 70 million passengers a year. The steel will be sold as scrap now. About half of that area is slated for public use, including sports and event space, more than twice the size of New York Central Park.
We were thinking it could be inaugurated as a park at the beginning of next year. That's a reality, and it will be able to coexist with other type of activities, to open areas which could serve to walk around in for bird watching, as you can see here.
Officials point to recent flooding as proof that maintenance would have been difficult and say less than 20% of construction was completed. They paid some $603 million to cancel more than 600 contracts.
Stocks in Asia Pacific are trading mixed as investors await the Federal Open Market Committee's quarterly update. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 and the Topix Index advanced fractionally. Mainland Chinese stocks, on the other hand, saw losses, with the Shenzhen component shedding almost 1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index has also slipped. Meanwhile, South Korea's Kospi is up marginally. Over in Australia, the ASX 200 gained over 1%. Now, Arsenal captain Pierre-Emerick has signed a new 3-year deal with the club. The 31-year-old striker joined the Gunners in January 2018 and won the Premier League Golden Boot in his first full season. At the first game of the new Premier League season, the Gabon striker scored in Arsenal's victory at Fulham. Meanwhile, Aston Villa captain Jack Grealish has also signed a new 5-year deal with the club. Grealish has been with his hometown club since he was 8 years old, making his debut in 2013. Elsewhere, West Brom have signed former Chelsea defender Branislav Ivanovic on a 1-year deal. With that, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.